Welcome to our TREA how-to workshops, and tonight we're pleased to talk with Per, and he's going to talk solar. So thank you from TREA for joining us.
Thank you very much. So tonight, as Diane said, the workshop is about solar. Now, there are how many different types of solar out there? There are three different types of solar that we will be discussing tonight. One is hot air solar panels, 2 is hot water solar panels, and 3 is the well-known PV or photovoltaic cells. So for each situation, there are some things that we have to know before we decide to go in a certain direction. The first two, hot air and hot water, can be homemade. And because these workshops are based on something that we could make ourselves, but also education, we're going to show a few videos on some hot air solar panels that you can make, but also hot water solar panels that you can make as well. And then we'll see some factory solar panels also for hot water. The solar photovoltaic cells that we're going to consider tonight is basically how to determine what you need in order to be able to set up a system. So tonight, let's get started, and I will just get our first video queued up.
Hey, my name's Scott Davis. I live in Bel Air, Maryland, and I'd like to share some information with you on designing the ultimate hot air collector.
There are lots of solar hot air collector designs on the internet and YouTube, but which ones are really the best? Many folks will insert temperature sensors that show how hot these collectors are, which can look darn impressive, but that only tells half the tale. There are many collector designs that work well, but in some cases, if you blow more than a breath of air through them, their output temperatures might just fall like a rock. Along with temperature rise, there is another, equally important variable. It is the amount of air flowing through the collector, which we usually measure in cubic feet per minute. In basic terms, if my collector is as hot as yours, but you have twice the air flowing through your collector, yours is working twice as well and producing twice as much heat. If I raise my airflow to equal yours, my temperature increase would only be half of what yours is. Both temperature rise and airflow are integral to comparing hot air collectors. This is a really important concept to keep in mind. As soon as someone tells you how hot their collector is, the very first thing you should be wondering is how much air they are flowing through it. With that backdrop, Gary of BuildItSolar.com, me, and a few other folks decided to take a close look at some common hot air collector designs, do some side-by-side testing, and figure out which ones really work the best. I'll give you a summary of those results in just a minute. But first, what are the desirable characteristics of a high-performance hot air collector? Hot air collectors usually consist of the back, a frame, polyiso foam board insulation, the heat absorber, and clear glazing. Here are some of the desirable characteristics of a high-performance hot air collector. First of all, it's got to be easy to build with readily available materials. The frame is usually built with wood or sometimes steel stud slots. The clear glazing on the front of the collector should be inexpensive and easy to work with. SunTough or Tough-Tex, readily available at Lowe's and Home Depot, are inexpensive, light, easy to cut with tin snips, offer UV protection, are tolerant to high heat, and are quite sturdy. There are many other options as well, but they are a great choice. The insulation inside the collector should be polyiso, found in stores like Home Depot, under the brand name Super Tough R. Most other types of insulation will melt inside a collector, so stick with polyiso. The construction steps should be simple and easily duplicated by anyone, regardless of any previous DIY experience. Fortunately, there are many collector designs that are quite easy to build, and some of the best are also the easiest. Next, we need sufficient airflow to capture the heat striking the absorber. 2.5 to 3 cubic feet of air per minute per square foot of collector is a good target. That usually gets the output down to around 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which makes for a more efficient collector, because not as much heat is lost out the glazing and sides than with collectors with lower airflow running hotter temperatures. And finally, absorber design. This is the heart of the solar panel, transferring the heat of the sun striking the panel to the passing air as efficiently as possible. Heat inside the panel is going to do one of two things. It will either be transferred to the internal airflow, or it will be lost, escaping out the clear glazing, sides, and back of the collector. The cooler the glazing and frame remain, the better. We want as much of the heat transferred to the airflow as possible. Not every design will meet all of these criteria, but characteristics of a good design include all areas of the absorber have good, uniform airflow to scrub the collector as efficiently as possible. No low-flow hotspots where excessive heat will be lost to the glazing. Here is an infrared photo that Gary took of a backpass collector. And as you can see, this has a lot of hotspots which show up with the brighter intensity colors in infrared. Even with the baffles, the air streams tends to follow close to the center. And the problem with this type of situation is that the heat at those hotspots, rather than getting pulled into the airflow, more of that radiates out the sides, out the glazing. It makes for a less efficient collector. The next desirable characteristic is that there is little, or ideally no, moving air at all near the glazing. Warm air inside the collector moving up near the glazing causes more heat loss through the glazing. Next, the back wall is most insulated, so heat should be concentrated there, as far from the glazing as possible. The absorber should be very dark and absorb all light. Light reflected back out should be reduced to a minimum. That's lost heat, lost energy. The absorber should have a lot of heat transfer surface area for the air to rub against to pick up heat. Here are some infrared photos that Gary took of aluminum downspouts being used as heat absorbers. We have the front of the downspouts where the sun is striking them. We also have the back. And what this shows is a lot of the heat that is striking the front of the downspout travels around the perimeter of the downspout to the back. And then, of course, you have the air flowing through the downspouts. So you have more than twice the surface area of a conventional backpass, which is one of the reasons the downspout design works really well. The collector should be very easy to seal, so there's minimal or no outside air infiltration. And the backpass and downspout designs have a clear advantage here. The air should be as turbulent as possible within the interior airflow. That will enhance heat exchange. And finally, there should be a low pressure drop, which means there shouldn't be a lot of resistance moving air through the collector. There are lots of interesting collector designs, and folks are coming up with new ones all the time. Here are a couple we've had some direct experience with. The empty box, the backpass, vented soffit, multi-layer screen, and aluminum downspout. The aluminum downspout design has many of the characteristics that we just listed. It has lots of heat surface transfer area. It should be relatively easy to get a good flow of air through all the tubes with the plenum, so there's no hot spots The heat is kept well away from the glazing towards the back insulation. There's no moving air at all near the glazing. It's easy to keep air sealed since all the moving air is inside the downspouts. With enough downspouts and adequately sized plenums, the pressure drop can be kept low, and it's really easy to build. So, how do we figure out which collector designs really work the best? The only reliable way to determine the performance of one collector to another is to compare them side by side under identical conditions. Comparing collectors at different locations, or even the same location on different days, is tough. Even on days that appear perfectly sunny, high thin clouds that are virtually invisible can vary the sun's intensity quite a bit. The outside temperature might be colder at my house than yours, and that will affect the performance a little. The collectors might be at different tilt angles, or aren't quite facing the same direction, which also affects the sun's intensity striking the collector. And it might be windier at your house, pulling more heat off the glazing. All these variables make testing at different locations and comparing results a challenge. But Gary and I wanted to come up with a way for folks who are geographically separate from each other to be able to contribute with meaningful comparative data. We also wanted to have a baseline to compare various designs at our own locations on different days and inevitably different conditions. What we decided to do was to each build a baseline reference collector that is easily duplicated so that the relative performance should be identical. Other collector designs can be run against the reference standard in side-by-side tests with identical airflow and the primary result, temperature rise, being compared. In other words, if the reference standard raises the temperature 50 degrees and collector B raises the temperature 60 degrees with the same airflow, collector B can be said to outperform the reference standard by 20%. We started out using a backpass design for the reference collector. It is documented in detail on builditsolar.com. The backpass works well, but we decided to change the reference standard to a double layer screen because the backpass requires a lot more pressure to move air through than other designs, making it harder to balance airflows. With our testing procedure laid out, it was then just a matter of measuring temperature rise and airflow. Measuring temperature rise, of course, is easy. All you need are sensors at the input and output of your collector under test and your reference standard. Airflow is the hard part. I could do a separate video detailing all the challenges associated with determining airflow. Be skeptical of anyone's numbers. It is a really hard thing to do. What's important is that the collectors you are comparing side by side have as close to identical airflow as possible. We used a couple different methods, including the time it takes to inflate a bag, inserting an anemometer in the airflow, and actually mounting personal computer fans inside the tubes and measuring their voltage. I use both the anemometer and PC voltage fan methods here. To perform the side-by-side testing, I built a 3-bay test collector here at the house. Gary built individual units, but he set them up side by side under identical conditions. So, which designs work best? Of the designs we've tested so far, going from worst to best, the lowest performing was the black box, followed by the backpass, and then the two best performers have been the vented soffit and fiberglass screen. What about the downspout design? Well, the performance numbers for that design look really good, but we don't have any side-by-side comparison just yet. Gary's getting ready to do some comparative testing of the downspout to our reference standard. So that's one more reason to join us on Simply Solar to see how his tests come out.
Enthusiasts in other areas of interest like amateur radio or backyard astronomy have been moving those areas of interest forward for decades. Meanwhile, solar is equally fun, it's less expensive, it pays us back many times over, it's great for the environment, and yet there are tons of opportunities for the backyard enthusiast or school science class yet to explore. Students could get together, build collectors as a group or individually, embrace them to see which designs work best and learn from there. If this kind of thing interests you, please join us on Simply Solar. Your ideas could make a difference in a magnitude far beyond you could possibly imagine. And in the meantime, we're having a great time, and we'd love to have you part of that. So, bring it on. Challenge the downspout collector or double layer screen. See if you can beat it. If you can, we all win. Maybe a different material like carbon fabric or felt will work even better. Or maybe a modification to one of the existing designs will give it a huge boost. It's up to you and me to figure this stuff out, and we're having a great time doing it. If this excites you, please join us on our email group, Simply Solar. We'd love to have you with us. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch our Designing the Ultimate Hot Air Collector video today. You take care.
Do-it-yourself project.
Yes?
It doesn't look very expensive to make something that's 16 feet wide and 8 feet high, as long as you've got a place to put it, but it doesn't look to be very expensive. Would I be right? Like maybe $1,000 or something?
Less.
Okay, so why wouldn't everybody have one of these?
Maybe not everyone has seen this.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And recognizing which solar panel is going to be the most efficient for them.
Yeah.
Not everyone has the time, or maybe even the ability, but the internet's out there.
Yeah.
I don't have it, but most people do.
You know, when you look at the materials involved,
Mm-hmm.
the simplicity of it.
Yes.
I mean, you can do other collectors, but I mean, when you look at this thing, a swimming pool, you throw it up against the fence and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then winter time, you're banging the heat into the house. But there's no combustion. There's just a little bit of energy used to transfer. Very efficient and very low cost. And it's okay. I'm just curious, but that's my first impression, that there's very little cost to this, and practically everybody could have one of these.
Absolutely.
So the fence between neighbors could actually be a collector.
That's right.
Okay.
Everyone should have a fence like that,
Yeah.
but not everyone views it as pretty, I guess you could say.
No, we'll get over that.
The next thing that we want to look at when we're looking at air solar is how else can we use the energy from hot air in solar. This is the solar food dehydrators. Let's carry on with hot water. There are many of them. This one, the very first one we're going to look at, is actually, it's only less than 6 minutes long, but it might floor you as to how easy it is to produce a copper made hot water solar panel. Okay? So let's have a look at that.
First, I built a jig to draw a straight line down a 52-inch long, 1-inch diameter copper tube. This tube will be a header for a solar panel. Next, mark that line every 2 inches down the pipe for a total of 21 locations, centered around the center of the pipe. Line up all of your headers and mark all the other pipes identically. Once all the locations have been marked, it's time to drill a pilot hole. I use a 1/8 inch drill bit for the pilot hole. Another jig holds the pipe in place during drilling. drill the pilot hole as close to the X as possible in the 21 locations. Then follow up the pilot hole with a larger bit. My small copper tube has a 3/8 inch outside diameter. The smaller copper tube is 1/4 inch inside diameter. It is carefully unrolled on the floor to prevent kinks. I use 60-foot rolls because it divides perfectly by 90 inches. The larger diameter tool allows the smaller copper tube to be marked and cut at exactly 90-inch pieces. The copper pieces still have bows in them. Carefully bend the copper tube as straight as possible. I have found that smacking against a flat surface does a nice job. Sand the ends of the tubes. Then cover with solder flux. The fun part is trying to shove each of the small copper tubes into the header pipe. The prior tubes often want to fall back out. Take a look down the copper pipe and verify all the tubes go in far enough, but not too far. If they go in too far, they won't reach the other header. Solder the copper tubes into the header. Be sure the header is hot enough or you won't get a good solder joint. For the second header, begin by soldering the 2 outside tubes to the header first. After they've cooled, then shove the rest of the pipes in place. And then, of course, solder them. Soldering headers indoors is okay, but the next step, soldering 5/1000 inch thick copper sheet to the copper tube, is best done outside due to the amount of smoke you will create. Press the copper sheet securely against the copper pipe. I found 3/4 inch black iron pipe did a reasonable job. Have lots of solder available. I use 50/50 lead-based solder for this part of the project. I also use a water-based flux for this part of the project. This jug was good for about 3 solar panels. At this point, you can straighten the copper tubes that are wedged between the black iron pipes. You will spend about an hour soldering the copper sheet to the pipes. The soldering process causes the copper to ripple. This is fine. The other side of the sheet is the face of the panel. I sandblasted the face of the panel to roughen up the surface for painting. I used Rust-Oleum high-temperature paint without a primer and sprayed the face of these panels. I let the panels hang in the basement for about a month to let them off-gas before putting them into the boxes. For building the boxes, I cut a rabbet in the back of each pressure-treated 2x4, then drilled holes where the headers will exit the sides of the panels. I assembled the boxes with screws, including the plywood back, which fits into a rabbet in the back of the 2x4s. What is missing from this video is that each box has 3 2x2s running across the back of the panel. This supports the copper core solar panel and strengthens the plywood back. After I verified that no screws go through the header holes, I took one of the side 2x4s off, placed a layer of fiberglass insulation in the box, and placed the solar panel on top of the fiberglass. The 2x4 side was then replaced. To pull the solar panel down, I put several screws with washers through the copper sheeting and into the 2x2s that were used to strengthen the back of the panel. To complete the project, the panels were mounted on a rack, tempered glass was added, and flashing used to cover the edges of the glass. Silicon radiator hose was used to connect the panels. This allows for disassembly later if necessary. PVC pipe was cut lengthwise and used to cover the radiator hoses. How hot can these panels make water? We pumped 60-degree water from a garden hose into the set of panels, and steam came out the other end, after the panels had been sitting in the sun for a while.
Our next discussions are going to help us recognize how to optimize our situation.
Sure.
And when we are able to optimize our situation, then we're able to possibly even go off-grid in many cases.
To me, it's really very inexpensive.
Inexpensive, simple.
You've got a bunch of tubes
Yep.
and a bunch of T's.
Yep.
And you make your connections.
Yes.
You make a rail, like
That's
it's like
right.
making a frame railing, and then you pop it in the railing, you put and you're done. It hasn't even, well, I wouldn't even say, even if you gave them paying $1,000,
Mhm.
wouldn't even be cost $1,000 to do that.
No.
So where's the hesitancy for people to embrace this kind of stuff? I mean, I'm thinking a workshop where people would come and a group of people would learn to do it together, and they'd make them together, and they'd go home and they'd use them.
Where are you going to use the hot water? How are you going to use the hot water?
Well, okay.
Okay, so now we're getting into what we're going to be looking at
Yeah.
next in the
Okay.
next video.
Good. Okay. I'm glad
And
that
I'm progressively getting through this in order that everyone can get something out of it. Because not only do we have to recognize, number one, the panels should be easy to build.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, they should be something that we could easily use the product from those panels. Okay?
Sure.
And if that's the case, then your question becomes my question. Why isn't everyone doing it?
Thank you. Okay. That's okay.
So these are some things that these workshops help us to really think about, consider,
Yeah.
ponder.
Build awareness.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's look at our next video then.
Welcome. My name's Scott Davis. I live in Bel Air, Maryland, which is northern Harford County. I'd like to tell you a little bit about solar and show you some of our solar projects here that we have going at the house. I got started in solar because I love the idea of taking care of the environment, not being dependent on the energy company, and of course saving money. But as I got into this hobby, I also discovered it's fun and really fascinating. There is nothing quite like the thrill of feeling free hot air blowing out of your collector across your hands, or heating your home, or taking a hot shower with water heated by a project that you built yourself. You'll remember that feeling of reward and satisfaction for a long time. Building solar projects can be very easy. I'm an office manager and a software developer. I have no prior experience in anything like this. So if I can do this, I know that you can. What is solar? Solar includes hot air for space heating, liquid systems for space heating or water heating, or PV for electricity. I've worked with all three, and I like the heating systems the best because they're the easiest, least expensive, and offer the quickest payback. There's nothing hard or complicated about solar, at least it doesn't have to be. When the sun shines on things, they get hot. If the material is black, it absorbs more heat and energy, and it gets even hotter. If you put that hot material under glazing, it gets really hot, even in the dead of winter. All we're doing is taking the heat that the sun is freely providing, capturing it with air or liquid, and moving it to where we need it. That's all there is to it. When solar is providing enough heat, our furnace and hot water heater don't run. It's clean, free, environmentally friendly, and completely renewable. Let me show you the projects I have going here. Behind me is our 24-foot by 8-foot solar collector. It's 192 square feet. It's used for hot water heating and also space heating in the wintertime. This collector is built at a very high tilt angle. The reason we did that is there's plenty of heat in the summertime. The only thing you're doing with heat is heating your domestic hot water, if you choose to go that route. What I wanted is not only to heat our domestic hot water, but to put a serious dent in the wintertime heating bills. So I built this to maximize the winter sun. In January, that sun tracks low across the sky. You want a nice high tilt angle to maximize that heat. And that's why this is designed the way that it is. This collector is simply PEX pipe, which is just a flexible tubing. It's under aluminum flashing. It's painted black. It just runs in a serpentine pattern through the collector. Fluid comes down from the house through a pipe, 4-inch PVC conduit that I have buried in the ground. It runs through the collector back up to the house. In the house, I have a thermal storage tank that I use to preheat our domestic hot water, and I also draw out that heat in the wintertime to heat a portion of our home. This collector was really easy to build. I have yet to solder copper pipe. Not that that's hard, but I haven't even had the need. PEX will connect with shark pipe fittings. Just pushes on, they don't leak, and you can use those to connect to copper as well. So this was a really easy build. It's something anyone can do, and it provides a lot of nice heat. And let me show you where we're storing that heat. Okay, this is our thermal storage tank. Now, before you start thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want anything like this in my house, you don't have to. You can do a lot with solar energy by simply taking the heat the moment that it's generated, distributing it, in the case of hot air, as we just blew it into the basement, or if you use a liquid system, you can just run it as underfloor radiant heat and right back out to the collector. You don't have to do a thermal storage tank. Where a thermal storage tank is beneficial is if you also want to do domestic hot water heating, or if you want to store heat for a longer period of time and distribute it a little bit more evenly. This tank is 200 gallons, approximately. It's just built out of 2x4s and plywood, built in place. We have this in the basement, but it could be in a crawl space, it could be in your garage, it could be outdoors. At the moment, we've got 140 degree fluid coming back from the collector, which was out in the backyard, as I showed you before. That's entering the tank by this tube here. Now, we'll come up here. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but we have 140 degree liquid coming back from the solar collector that I showed you out in the backyard. It's entering this copper coil, which is the smaller coil inside our thermal storage tank. Again, 200 gallons of water. The orange pipe, that's more PEX pipe, that's simply water that has come from the town before it goes to our conventional hot water system. So our hot water is preheated and then goes to the conventional tank. So if the sun's not shining, it's not a problem. The conventional tank does its job. And that's basically all there is to it. It's a very simple system. These are just my temperature sensors that I have here. Temperature in the tank right now somewhere around 130 degrees. So, and ours, we're still going up here, 141 feeding it. So we'll get it up a few more degrees here before this day's over. So that's our thermal storage tank. This is the cold water destined for our hot water heater. It's diverted first to our thermal storage tank. So it runs through that coil of PEX, gets very hot, comes back, and then feeds our regular water heater. So our regular water heater runs very little or not at all in most cases unless we have cloudy days. Okay, behind me is our solar hot air collector. This collector is on the side of the house that faces towards the street and the neighbors. So I wanted to build something low profile that they really wouldn't notice, and this worked out perfectly. This collector is only 13 inches high and is 24 feet long. what I did is take aluminum downspouts, painted them black with Rust-Oleum flat black spray paint, and I'm simply taking air from our basement, running it down one end, and then back up the other, and then back down to the basement. Again, hot material, or black material, gets really hot under glazing, and we're taking advantage of that heat. This is truly a vertical orientation, so the efficiency of this collector actually improves as we get towards the coldest months of the year as well, when we have nice low tracking sun. And I will show you inside what we've done with that as well. Okay, here we are inside our basement. This is the input and output for our solar hot air collector. This fan is running, which is pulling air off the basement up through our hot air downspout collector. It runs through the downspouts, circulates, and blows out back here at about 80 cubic feet per minute. So for hours on end, we've got nice hot air that's pouring out of this collector, fills up our basement, radiates up into the house and up through the stairway. Simply a fan. There's a snap switch in the collector which automatically turns the fan on and off when it gets over 110 degrees and fires it up, turns off automatically. So it's simple plug and play. Very easy, very inexpensive, and it does the job. It should last for decades. You can do this too. It's fun, it helps the environment, and it'll save you money. Solar can be a great family project too. We had a lot of fun putting these projects together. And you don't have to start on a large scale. Keep in mind that every BTU you generate with solar, that's one less BTU that you're going to have to pay for. And as you gain experience, you can always add on from there. If you'd like to learn more, I put together a webpage that has a lot more information. Please visit www.n3fjp.com/solar. I also have an email group where you can ask questions and talk to me and other solar enthusiasts and get their ideas and input for any projects that you have in mind. I have a link to join that group from the webpage that I just gave you. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes to learn about solar. I hope you have a great day.
I was going to show the passive. Do you want to see the passive?
Passive cooling or passive heating?
Passive heating. Okay, so that has its doors closed right now. So that's at nighttime. Okay, during the day, let's see if they do a shot with it open. I'm trying to find it here.
Well, it's what you call a preheat passive system.
Yes.
So there's no activity, it's just water flow.
Yeah, there are the tanks.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Let's see if we can find.
So it's like a solar cooker.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what it is. Well, let's go to the next section here. We're just going to look at a couple of pictures of Zin right there.
Yes.
So that is the evacuated tube solar panel.
Hey, my name's Scott Davis. I live in Bel Air, Maryland, and I wanted to take just a few minutes to tell you about the latest collector that my son Brad and I built just 2 weeks ago. This is a Cpvc collector that we put in our 8-foot by 8-foot test frame. It's immediately adjacent to our PEX collector, which we built a couple years ago, which is in a 24-foot by 8-foot frame. Now what's nice is I can compare the temperature rise of both collectors, and I do that by sending fluid to this Cpvc collector first, then it goes to the PEX collector, and I can measure the side-by-side real-time comparison with the exact same amount of fluid, so I know I've got a pretty good comparison between the two collectors. And what's neat is this Cpvc collector is giving about a 15 degree Fahrenheit
temperature rise, while the PEX collector is giving a 30-degree temperature rise. But the PEX collector is 3 times as big. So that means if I had the Cpvc design in the PEX space, I would have a 45-degree rise in that space instead of 30. So, point being, this thing's working. And another neat advantage of this Cpvc design is that I was able to do a parallel flow. I have multiple parallel risers going from headers, and that enables the flow to be very low resistance. The PEX design has a serpentine pattern. All the water goes through a single loop at a time, so it's a lot more resistant. It lowers the flow, that slows down the efficiency. So I'm really happy with this Cpvc design. It's very inexpensive. Cpvc is cheap. This is all half-inch Cpvc, and I spaced the risers 3 inches apart. Some of the commercial collectors and homebrew collectors that use copper's expensive, so folks generally don't space it much closer than 6 inches. By doing it 3 inches, I've got a much higher wetted surface area. The risers are much closer together, so the heat that strikes the aluminum between the risers only has to travel a maximum of 1.5 inches, as opposed to 3 inches with the copper. So, bottom line is the thing is working great. I'm really happy with it. I guess the one thing I should caution anybody who's considering a Cpvc design, Cpvc is rated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit at 100 psi. Now, our solar systems have very low pressure. They're just a few psi. So we should be good into 200 F. But if you were ever in a situation where the fluid were to stop flowing, that could conceivably get over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and you could have a puddle of Cpvc. There are things you can do to mitigate that concern. Some of the things that you can do are to build at a real high tilt angle, which is better anyway for the low tracking winter sun. You want it highly efficient in the winter. In the summer it's not so efficient, but you don't need all the heat because you're only doing hot water. You're not heating your home with that. And because the sun's striking it from way up there instead of flat on, it's not going to get cranked up to those high temperatures even though it's hotter outside. I also built this with, it's not sealed overly tightly, a little air infiltration. It may hurt the performance a little, but it also gives me some confidence that I'm not ever going to exceed that 200 degree Fahrenheit borderline. Now anyway, this is the collector. I would like to take a minute now and show you how Brad and I put this together.
If you've never done a solar project before, this is a great introductory project to start with. It's super easy, anyone can do it, and it works well. I built an 8-foot by 8-foot collector, 64 square feet. So, I wanted the risers spaced just 3 inches apart. I wound up with 32 Cpvc risers. I have 64 Ts. Now the Ts are inexpensive, they're only 19 cents each. This is all half-inch Cpvc. The connectors, and then the FlowGuard gold glue that glues everything together. Here Brad is holding one of the headers that we've started gluing together. It's just underway, about halfway. I should add that Brad is also our chief recorder for all these videos. Now we have both headers complete, and each one just under 8 feet wide, and we're ready to start attaching the risers. Here's the frame that the completed assembly will go in. It's backed with polyiso insulation. Always use polyiso in a collector because that can withstand the high temperatures that we experience with our solar collectors. Other types of insulation will actually melt. And here we have the risers all glued in place. One of the most tedious and time-consuming parts of the PEX collector was bending all the flashing with the grooves to go around the PEX.
Now, the PEX is about 6 inches apart, much like the conventional copper collectors, and I decided I might sacrifice a little performance doing this, but I wasn't going to bend all those this time. Instead, since these are only 3 inches apart, meaning there's only 1.5 inches of distance that the heat has to travel, I decided I'm not going to bend these guys. I'm just going to lay out silicone caulk on each piece of CPVC and then just lay the aluminum flashing right on the caulk. Now we have all the pieces of flashing laid on the CPVC, and a couple of those pieces of flashing actually had been used in a prior project. That's why they have a little bit of discoloration. And here we have the unpainted absorber set in the collector, and a couple of the pieces of flashing are actually golden in color, but it's all similar thickness, off-the-shelf flashing that you find at Lowe's or Home Depot. And here you can see a front view. And here is the side view. This collector went together super easy with no problems at all. In the final video clip where you see me talking, you're going to see what appears to be a wet portion of the collector. That's actually a different paint. I spray painted this with flat black spray paint, which was easy and quick to do. But apparently one of the cans was not flat black, it was a glossy, so that's why that looks wet. But I had zero problems with leaks. This collector is outperforming the PEX collector, and it's just so darn easy. I really highly recommend it, especially if you've never taken on a project before. You'll get great results. It's a great family project, a lot of fun, and I highly encourage getting started with it. Thanks so much for watching our segment on the Cpvc Collector. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have questions or you want to learn more about solar, I invite you to join us on our email group, Simply Solar. There's a lot of folks who actually have a lot more experience with DIY and solar than I do on the group, and we're all eager to help and would love to have you as part of our group. So again, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.
Looking at the system, do you have a preference for evacuated tube from the point of view of preference, in a sense, from the water systems?
The evacuated tube delivers higher temperatures quicker. That's really the only difference. There is one other significant difference that I have learned in the last few years, is that each tube in certain evacuated tube systems can actually be removed while the system is still functioning. So it's a pressure fit at the on the top header.
Like, yeah, manifold.
Yeah. Whereas if the box or if the glass fails, either the glass has to be changed, or whatever is wrong with inside the box, it has to be removed or taken apart, fixed, and then put back together.
One of the very good things about the tube that I like is that you can rotate the fins inside these tubes, so that you see that roof might be facing west, but you can rotate the fins inside it so that they face south. Interesting. So, you're playing with the morphology or the geometry of a roof.
Right.
And when the roof doesn't suit the orientation, you can change it within the tubes. You can't do that with passive.
True.
Well, one of the things with the fluid systems also is that the harvesting fluid has to be the antifreeze fluid, because in the wintertime, if you have no sun, you need that capacity to be able to go below zero.
Absolutely.
So that's obviously needs common sense.
There is, however, one system where you do not require antifreeze. It is the system that flows back inside the envelope.
Oh, you're talking
Back.
about the,
Back.
yeah.
It's
the
a
vacuum.
That's
yeah.
right.
yeah.
That's what solar panels.
It doesn't kick
Okay.
on until the temperature is high enough to do that. It's a
Right.
drawback system or a drawdown.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
Yes.
are most of the solar panel systems that way?
I don't think so. I've never seen a drawdown system, but you know, the antifreeze works quite well. Does for me anyway.
Of course, it's specifically designed for the purpose. Solar PV. This video really has helped us to see that it is possible, and there are new features out there for solar photovoltaics panels that will help to reduce not only the amount of money that we have to spend on the system, but we don't have to have as many batteries, and the system can be set up in such a way that it can heat our water, it can pump our water, it can pressurize our air or water, and still have leftover energy for air conditioning, or as the heat pumps do, they can also heat.
So what you're looking for is you're looking for priority settings for the actual energy you're generating as you're generating it, rather than relying on a battery bank to store all of it for you.
The PowerPoint tracker
Yes.
does all of that
Yeah, it manages it.
with the help of additional relays.
Right.
All you have to do is tell those relays which one you want first, second,
Mhm.
third, fourth, and fifth.
Right.
That's it.
There's one point I'd like to add.
Yes.
On the battery bank, the degradation of a battery over time
Yes.
can affect two ways. One is the capacity that it can hold,
Yes.
because then it changes that energy into heat with the resistance. There is a device called a Canada's device. It's a desulfation device that prevents the sulfation of the battery, maintains it in optimum operational performance, and is very low cost.
Mm-hmm.
So that the battery will do double or triple the expected life. But while it's doing the life, it's also doing it efficiently.
Right. A lot of chargers come with that technology
Yes.
built in at this point.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are 5 things that we do well to look at when we're looking at solar PV. We look at determining our electrical requirements. That's number 1. Number 2 is the battery selection. Number 3, inverter selection is going to be important. Then PV panels, and if you're going to add generators or wind turbines, and you need some calculations to go with that, that's number 4. And the 5th one is your charge controller. And that was that PowerPoint tracker.
Right.
That's the charge controller.
Thank you.
Thank you for this evening.
Thank you very much.